We're going to go over the general principles for fast swimming and what they look like so that you can learn to see these skills in action. And so one of the most important skills is to create a lot of propulsion. And one of the most important things to do in order to create a lot of propulsion is to create a big surface area with the arm or the leg. And that's what we're going to go over today. So the first place we're going to take a look at is in sprint freestyle. And what you can see here is that the athletes are creating a big surface area. You can see that whole forearm, the whole arm is going to be used to move water backwards. And then the other athlete above him, right there, you can see the whole arm is being used to create propulsion. So we'll watch it again here. Right there, there's a huge surface area that's moving directly backwards, and that's going to move the athlete forwards. And so with the arms, it's about creating a huge surface area and then getting into that surface area in the sprints right away, and that's going to be critical for fast swimming. So here we'll take a look at the same thing with an endurance athlete, and you can see here, right in this position, there's a huge surface area, and that surface area is going to be moving backwards. And so with each stroke, instead of just using the hands, the athlete's going to be able to use the whole arm, especially the forearm and the hand, to create speed and help them move forwards. And so that's one example. Take a look at another. So another athlete here. This is over a 400-meter race. Again, a really big surface area that's moving straight backwards, and that's what's going to help them be successful. And so to create a lot of propulsion, you need big surface areas to move athletes forward. One more example here. Again, big surface area moving backwards. So we're going to see the same principles here in action with backstroke. You can see right there, there's a big surface area that's moving backwards. And so that whole arm is being used to pull as opposed to just the hand. So the whole forearm, the whole arm is oriented backwards, and that's helping the athlete move forwards. And so to create a lot of propulsion, there needs to be a big surface area. You can see that here with this athlete right there, big surface area that's moving backwards. Another athlete here from a different angle, you can see that arm right there, right towards the bottom there, and that's moving straight back. And then right here, you can see a big surface area, that hands pointing out to the side, arm moving back. One more athlete here. Again, big surface area, pulling backwards, orienting the whole arm so it's facing backwards, and then pulling straight backwards. Take a look at butterflies here. So right there, now you've got a big surface area, the whole forearm, the whole arm's being used to move the athlete forward. You can see in both these frames, the athlete on the left here, right, is getting a great big forearm action there, and the same thing with the athlete right in front of us. Again, right there, there's a big surface area. That whole forearm is being used to pull right there, pull the athlete forward. It's not just the hands, it's the whole forearm and the whole arm. Right there, the whole surface area of the arm and the forearm, of the hand and the forearm, is being used to move the athlete forward. Again, another athlete. Right there, both forearms are being used to move the athlete forward. We'll take a look at the same thing with sprint butterflies. So there, again, whole arm, big surface area to move the athlete forward. Another athlete, big surface area, moving straight back to move them straight forward. Again, here from a different angle. Right there, you can see the whole arm is being used to create propulsion. And now we'll take a look at it breaststroke, and we'll see the same thing with the upper body. So athlete swimming forward. So right here, you can see the whole arm is being used to pull the athlete forward. Really big surface area, creating a lot of propulsion. So female athlete here, and again, moving right into a position right here. The forearms and the hands are being used to move the athlete forward by pulling straight backwards. So really helpful to get a big surface area here in breaststroke. It's not that different than any of the other strokes. It's the same basic position that athletes are getting into. Last athlete here, again, big, strong position right there, pulling straight back with a big surface area. You can see the whole arm is getting engaged and the whole arm is working. So now with breaststroke, what's also important is creating a lot of force, a lot of propulsion with the legs, especially. So you can see here, the feet are outside the knees, and that's going to allow the whole shin to, right there. You can see the shin is moving backwards, and the feet and the shin makes the surface area that much bigger so that they can create even more propulsion. Right there, that's going to be really effective at creating a ton of propulsion. Watch the athlete here. So feet turn out, you can see that they're outside the knees and then kicking straight back using the whole shin and the foot to create propulsion. So same concepts, it's just a different action. So right there, the whole leg is being used, the whole lower leg, more so the feet than the shins, but the shins are still contributing, and the foot is really turned out so it can maximize propulsion. So breaststroke kick from another angle here, and here you can really see the feet turn out right there, and the whole shin, especially the top half of the shin, is being used to create propulsion in conjunction with the foot, and everything's moving backwards, so a big surface area moved backwards. So with dolphin kicking too, it's about creating a big surface area moving backwards, and if you watch the athlete in front here, you can see right here, the whole foot and a big portion of the shins are oriented backwards, and that's a big surface area to kick with. It's not just the feet, it's the feet and the shins, and the feet and the shins are both being oriented backwards so that a big surface area can be used instead of a relatively small one. And that's going to be really critical to being really effective underwater and fast in the kicking. So same thing here. Again, big surface area right here is being pushed backwards. The whole foot is being used. The flexibility of the ankles really plays a key here, and the shins are being used as well. And that's going to be really important. And the more surface area that can be oriented backwards, the faster athletes are going to swim underwater. So again, right here, you can see big surface area that's moving backwards. Right there. See the feet, the shins, everything's moving backwards, and it's throwing water backwards, moving the athlete forward. One last athlete here. Same thing. Right there, you can see everything is directed backwards so that the athlete goes forward. So big surface area means they can move more water with each stroke. So the previous skill we discussed how to create a really large surface area and what that looks like. Here, we're going to discuss how athletes use that large surface area and move a lot of water backwards for a long period of time. So what we're going to look for and try to see are the different positions that athletes achieve in different strokes and how those positions allow them to move water backwards for a long period of time by creating a surface area that's oriented backwards for a long period of time. So first, we're going to look at sprint freestyle. So what we'll see here is from this position, more or less right here, all the way through the back of the stroke, that arm is oriented backwards. And as you see here, the relationship with the upper arm and the forearm changes, but the forearm and the hand continue to move backwards, directly backwards, all the way until right about there. And so what's happening with each stroke is athletes are orienting the arm backwards, and then they're moving that position backwards for as long as they can. And they're changing the configuration of the elbow and the hand and the upper arm so that they can continue to do so. If we watch the other athlete beneath him, you'll see enter here, set it up, and then they're moving backwards throughout that whole stroke cycle. And there's a pretty good orientation throughout the whole stroke, as you can see there. So we'll look at a different sprint athlete here, and they take a little bit of a different approach. And what you'll notice is that the front half of the stroke is not quite as effective as the other athlete, and especially compared to some distance athletes. But what happens is the arm is oriented backwards a little bit later, but it gets much deeper, and the back part of the stroke, there's a much more horizontal or backwards orientation for longer, and that orientation is deeper. So there's not quite as effective an orientation in the front of the stroke. However, this athlete in particular is able to move water backwards for a long period of time in the back part of the stroke. So now we'll turn to distance athletes in freestyle, and you can see here orientation backwards, and then that position is maintained throughout the back part of the stroke. And so it's a long period of time where the forearm and the hand is moving water directly backwards. So throughout the majority of the stroke, the It's oriented towards creating a backwards propulsion. See the same thing here with this athlete. So again, throughout that entire period, oriented backwards, right there, right there. And then finally with this athlete, you can see backwards orientation from this point and then held throughout the whole back part of the stroke. It's not just about creating an effective position, it's about maintaining that position for as long as possible throughout the whole stroke so that athletes can move a lot of water backwards for a long period of time, thereby creating speed. So we'll take a look at the same principles here for backstroke. So again, the forearm is and the hand is oriented backwards to the big surface area, and then throughout the whole stroke, it's moved directly backwards. And so it's not just that this position is achieved for a brief period of time, it's held throughout the whole stroke for a long period of time. So for each stroke, the athlete's creating a big surface area and then maintaining that surface area all the way through the back of the stroke. So same thing from a different angle here. You can see now there's that orientation backwards and then directed backwards throughout the entire stroke. Again, on the other side, and then straight back through there. And so it's a big surface area held for a long period of time with each stroke, which is going to create a lot of propulsion, which is going to create a lot of speed. So one last angle here. See big surface area, moved all the way backwards. You can see that with the athlete behind. Again, they've achieved a big surface area. Now they're going to move that directly backwards throughout the whole stroke as well. Now we'll take a look at it with butterfly. And you can see good position here, and then it's maintained throughout the back part of the stroke. So it's again a big surface area moved for a long period of time. So it's again not just creating the surface area, not creating the positions, but maintaining that throughout the entire stroke cycle to really create speed. See that here, good position, and then held all the way through, right there. Good position, held all the way throughout the entire stroke. Another athlete here, again, strong positions, held throughout the entire stroke. A big surface area for a long period of time. Now with underwater kicking, things are happening faster and the range of motion is going to be smaller, but the same principles apply. So if we watch this athlete here, again, big surface area, and it's maintained for as long as possible within the constraints of the lower body. And obviously, because the kick rates are much higher than the stroke rates you see in swimming, there's not going to be as much water moved with each stroke, and so surface areas are not going to be, so the surface areas aren't going to be sustained as long as they are with the arms. However, the longer they can be sustained, the more speed they'll create. And you can see some of these athletes are pretty effective. This first athlete was an Olympic champion and elite, certainly one of the best underwater dolphin kickers at the time. And you can see there's a big surface area and it's maintained for a pretty long period of time. Again, here, another athlete. And this is the best orientation, and then it's trying to maintain it, especially the orientation of the feet, for as long as possible. So when athletes have really flexible ankles, they're going to be more effective at doing so. Yeah, here, really good position, and then it's maintained for as long as possible within the constraints of the anatomy of the lower limbs. So same principles, even if it's achieved in a different manner than the upper body. Now with breaststroke kicking, so that's an effective position, and we'll try to maintain that again as long as possible. And so the orientation of the foot pointed outwards and facing back, the goal is to create it and hold it for as long as possible. And there are limitations of the structures of the legs, so that it can't be held indefinitely. The goal is to create it as long as possible and for as effectively as possible. So the athlete here, you can see the feet turn out, and they're staying turned out until the end of the kick. So the longer that they can maintain that position, the more effective they're going to be at creating propulsion. Same thing for here. You can see feet are turned out in these athletes, and they're trying to sustain it, especially right there on the left. You can see that position that they achieve, and they hold. And the more swimmers can hold those positions for longer, they're going to be able to create more propulsion. Something here. You can see these athletes are keeping the feet pointed out for as long as they can. Now, when it comes to the breaststroke pull, you can see a really strong orientation throughout that position, and they're holding it as long as possible. Now, the difference between breaststroke and the other strokes is that the athletes can't pull down through the hips. So part of that propulsion gets cut off a little bit sooner than otherwise would. It's still maintained for as long as possible within the context of the stroke and the limitations of the upper body. So from here to here, there's a really strong pulling action, and the backwards orientation is maintained for a long period of time. See the same thing with this athlete. So again, really great orientation, and then pulled straight back all the way so that the elbows come close to the body, and then the pull is cut off because they have to recover the arms earlier. However, for that long period of time, as long as possible, again, within the context of the stroke and the structures of the shoulders, really great position, pulling backwards for as long as possible. It's not just an instant where these positions are achieved, they're maintained for a significant period of time. We talked about the specific positions and the duration that they try to maintain those positions. However, it's not just the specific movements that they use, it's how they do it that makes a difference. And what really matters is that there's an acceleration of the limb throughout the pull or the kick. And so what starts off relatively slow is going to end up relatively fast. And you see that with all strokes and all propulsive actions. There's an acceleration of the limb. What we'll do today is see what that looks like and how it applies to each of the strokes. So we'll start here with endurance freestyle, and what you can see is that there's patience in the front, and then as the pull comes through, there's an acceleration of the hand, there's an acceleration of the limb. And so that's going to be, regardless of the distance, there's still going to be an acceleration, and it's still going to be a pretty strong acceleration, even though it's a distance event. And so what you'll see is more patience in the front, but there's still going to be a strong acceleration of the limb through the back of the stroke. You can really see how the rate picks up towards the back of the stroke. And so a lot of times when athletes try to pick up their stroke rate, they do so in the inappropriate times. Either just try to pick up the recoveries or they rush the front of the stroke. But what really needs to happen is there needs to be a stronger acceleration of the limb. Now we'll take a look at sprint freestyle, and what swimmers tend to think when it's time to sprint is that they need to move their arms as fast as possible. And while their arms definitely need to move faster relative to slower speeds, there's still a patience in the front and there's still an acceleration of the limb. And the only way to accelerate is to start slower and then build the speed. And so if everything's moving as fast as possible, you can't have an acceleration. So there's some patience in the front, and then you can see towards the back of the stroke, the hand speed and the limb speed really starts to pick up, and there's an acceleration that really gets the hand through the back part of the stroke, and that's going to create more propulsion. It's also going to help facilitate the recovery in the arm into the transition to recover the stroke over the wall. So you can see patience in the front and then acceleration in the back. And even at really fast speeds, this is an Olympic final, you still see that show up. Patience and then acceleration. So backstrokers here. There's patience, obviously, when they're setting up the stroke, but then once it's stroke set up, they start to build pressure, and it's not till the very end right there where there's a real acceleration of the hand and the forearm. And so there's definite patience during the catch. Once the catch is set up, then they start really starting to add the pressure and pick up the speed, but it's not towards the end until there's a full acceleration. So that's what they're really looking for, is once the hand gets towards the back half of the stroke, that's when the pace really picks up and where they really see the speed. So see patience, and then you can really see the hand speed pick up there, and that's what we're looking for. So the same thing as in freestyle, see in backstroke. So set up and then accelerate the hand through. So we'll watch the same thing here with fly, and then patience, application of force, and right there you really see the hands accelerate through the back of the stroke. And while this obviously creates a lot of propulsion, it also facilitates the recoveries because the arms now have momentum, and it's going to be a lot easier to swing them around. So patience, and then building the speed and building the pressure as they go through. See that here with another athlete. Patience, and then accelerating the hands through right there. You can see the hand speed picks up, and they're using that hand speed to create more propulsion to help go faster. Different angle here, you can see the same thing as the hands get towards the back half of the stroke, they really pick up the speed. So breaststroke here, see patience, and then hand speed builds right there. Once the elbows are starting to squeeze to the body, that's where the hand speed really picks up and accelerates forward. So right there, you can see the hand speed really picks up. So there's patience, and then a final squeeze at the end that really gets the hand speed up. Same thing here. higher rate in this athlete. Still, patience, relative acceleration of the hands. If the hand speed is picking up right there towards the end of the pull. So breaststroke kicking here, it's going to be the same thing. The feet are pretty patient in setting up, and then they start really picking it up, and they really accelerate through. You can see the feet really snap through the back half of the kick, and that's what's really going to create a lot of propulsion. So it's the same principles as when using the arms. It's just happening with the legs. There's a real acceleration of the kick towards the back half of it, the patient setup, build of pressure, and then a real acceleration. Same thing here for this athlete. So set up, build, and then really snap through the back of it. So when moving water backwards, accelerating the limbs is really going to help them create more propulsion as they go through. Like I said earlier, the most difficult aspect of it is not just achieving a really high speed. It needs to be achieved patiently, or else it's not really going to be nearly as effective, and they're actually going to lose some of the propulsion they create if they rush it too much. So that's one of the big challenges in swimming, is being patient yet aggressive. So you can see these athletes here, they set up the kick and they really snap it right there. Snap the back half of the kick as they go through. Another athlete here, set up the kick and then snap it through. Really trying to finish the legs, really trying to finish the kick with really high tempo. So last piece we'll look at is underwater dolphin kicking. And this is going to be a little bit more difficult to see because it's happening much faster and the rates are much higher as compared to using the arms or breaststroke kick. But what we'll see is when the feet reverse, they're going to necessarily stop in the water, and then they're going to start to accelerate forwards. And right there, you can see the final snap is really going to be fast. So it builds a little slow, and then you can see the foot speed really picks up there. So the feet reverse, starts a little bit slower, and then really snaps through at the end. And the foot speed really starts to pick up throughout the dolphin kick cycle. Take a look at it for another athlete. So steady, and then right there you can see the foot speed really pick up about midway through the kick cycle right there. And that's what's going to help them create more and more propulsion with each and every kick. So same thing, see when the feet reverse, they're not moving as fast, and that flick right there, see in that one frame how much further the feet move, and not with one kick. So boom, two, and then right there, there's much more distance covered with that kick. And that's really an acceleration of the kick. And so that's what's really hard about dolphin kicking, is they have to reverse speed really quickly and then also try to build the pressure throughout the kick by building the speed, but it's already at a really high speed. So that's what makes it pretty difficult to do really well. Still, the same things apply. To increase propulsion, there needs to be acceleration of the limbs and acceleration of the foot speed. And what we're going to talk about with one of these skills is the idea of setting up the stroke with the upper body to open the armpit and then creating propulsion by closing the armpit. So the main idea here is that to create an effective pull, the muscles of the back and then the chest, the lats and the pecs, are going to be powering the pull. However, in order to do so, the arm needs to be in a position where those muscles can contract for a longer period of time in strong positions in order to create a lot of force. And those positions generally start with an open armpit, so that there's a lot of space in the armpit, and then the armpit closes upon contraction of those muscles, and that's what allows athletes to create a lot of propulsion and move themselves forward. And that pull needs to happen when the arm is positioned to create a lot of surface area. So in the first couple of videos, we discussed how it's important to position the arm to create a large surface area. What's also as important is that the arm is positioned in a way that the strongest muscles of the upper body can contract for a long period of time to create propulsion. And that's what we're going to take a look at here. So first, we're going to take a look at freestyle. And so with this athlete, it's going to achieve this position here. You can see that there's a lot of space in their armpit. And that means that the chest muscles and the back muscles are lengthened. And when they're lengthened, they have a high potential to create a lot of force because they can contract for a long period of time. And then as the athlete pulls back right here, you can see that that space in the armpit collapses because the muscles of the chest and the back are contracted. And so if athletes are creating positions where there's not a lot of space, they're not going to be able to pull backwards for a long period of time, or they're not going to be able to pull backwards for a long period of time with the strongest muscles of the upper body. So again, we'll take a look at it here. The athlete's in position. And like we saw before, they create that big surface area, but just as importantly, there's a lot of space in the armpit. And so the armpit is wide open, and then during the pull, it closes down right away. So we can see this a little bit faster speed. It's open, and then it closes. It's open here, and then it closes. Those are the positions that need to be achieved in order to create a lot of propulsion so that the strongest muscles can do the work. Otherwise, weaker muscles are going to have to do the job. So we'll take a look at another athlete here. So armpit is open, and then it closes right there. And so the more effectively athletes can do that, the faster they're going to swim. So we'll take another look at the same dynamic here in sprint freestyle. The reason we'll look at the sprint freestyle is because the timing changes a little bit, and that reflects a little bit differently in how athletes pull through the water. But you can see here, there's a big space here in their armpit, and then it closes down by the end of it so that the athlete can create a lot of propulsion using those strongest muscles. So right here, and then big space, and now the space is closed. You can see that the arm is squeezed tight to the body, the armpit's completely closed. And then when the athlete's the arm out in front, the elbow sliding out to the side, that makes a big space, and then everything collapses here. So same dynamics, just different time. So we'll walk backstroke here, and so right here, now we're in a position, you can see that there's a lot of space, and now that space is closing down. Right there's a lot of space, and then the space is closing down. You can see that in the opposite arm right here. There's a big space in that armpit, and then towards the end, that space all collapses down. Different athlete here, big space. There's a lot of space right in that armpit, and then it collapses down. See the same thing with the other athlete in the back, big space there, and then it collapses down. So it's the same basic action in all of the strokes because the same muscles are doing the work. And so to create a great pull, you need to get in good positions in terms of surface area, but you also need to have athletes get in good positions so that they can use the strongest muscles to do the work. Otherwise, they're either not going to be able to create the necessary speed, or they're only going to be able to create that speed for such a short time because they're simply going to get too tired. So you can see the big space. You can see that you can literally see his armpit there, and that's a ton of space. And then it closes down. There's a ton of space, and then it closes down. So again, same dynamics. This one is a great angle, so you can see all that space here, and then closes down. So you can see all that space here, and then closes down. Tons of space, and then the strongest muscles do the work to close it down. So with butterfly, watch from underneath. And you can see the paths here. So big space in between in that armpit, and then stays pretty big. And as the athlete pulls, you can see it all closes down and all disappears. So again, same dynamics because the athletes need to use the resources they have, which are the strongest muscles of the upper body, and then it closes down as they take that pull. Watch from a different angle here. You can see big space there, and then closes it down. And again, just represents creating positions where swimmers can take most advantage of the resources they have so that they can create a big surface area and they can power that pull with the strongest muscles they have. Again, another athlete here, big, see the armpits are open, and then they close down with the pull. Take one more look at a butterfly swimmer because you can really see it here. So you can see how much space. You can see the shoulder blades are sliding out, really creating more space. And then right there, it all closes down, it all disappears. So big space, and then closes it down. And so another example of the same basic mechanics being used to create speed. So lastly, we'll take a look at breaststroke. And again, it's going to be very similar to butterfly. See here, this is the video we just watched, big open armpit, and then it closes all down, and that space disappears. So space, and then close. Space, and then close. Watch from a different angle here, big space, and then close. big space, and then closed. Like we talked about before, swimmers are orienting their arms to create surface area. That's why they have a high elbow catch. That's why they have an early vertical forearm. All those skills are basically to create a big surface area. In terms of the action of the pull, it's so that they can use the strongest muscles of the upper body in order to create propulsion. If they choose to do otherwise, they either won't be able to create the same amount of speed or they won't be able to sustain it. So same thing with another athlete here. Opens the armpit and then closes it. Opens the armpit and then closes it. So again, accomplishing the dual function of creating a big surface area and using the strongest muscles to move that surface area backwards. We're going to discuss how rotation affects propulsion in freestyle and backstroke. What's typically discussed is how rotation adds force because swimmers can rotate their shoulders and hips to improve the strength of the pull. And as we'll see, while rotation can aid propulsion, it doesn't necessarily do so by making the pull stronger. As we discussed in the last video, a key aspect of creating propulsion is opening the armpit and then effectively closing the armpit so that the strongest muscles of the upper body can perform the pull. As we'll see in the videos, what rotation does is it prolongs the duration of which the armpit can stay open, yet still actively be closing. So rotation allows for a stronger pull because the strongest muscles of the upper body can act for a longer period of time. As we watch this athlete, they're rotating to the right side as they pull. Now, imagine if they had stayed in this position on the side and pulled, the armpit would close faster than if they rotate away from the arm. So if they're rotating away from the pulling arm, it's going to keep that space open for a longer period of time so that they can create propulsion for a longer period of time. So we can see here, rotating away from the arm will keep the armpit open. Just perform that action for yourself right here. You can see how rotating away from the pulling arm is going to prolong the period which the armpit stays open, which means that the arm can still effectively pull back with a lot of force for a longer period of time. See that with the athlete behind, rotating away from the arm, and they're able to keep that space open for a longer period of time. This will be more dramatic with endurance athletes because the stroke rate is lower and they have more time to rotate and they can perform more rotation. You can see it here from another angle. Again, the athlete's rotating away from the pulling arm, and that allows the pull to happen for a longer period of time. So in this instance, if the athlete had stayed flat, the pull would be almost done at this point, but because she's rotating, she's able to create more space for a longer period of time and therefore get a more effective pull. So the same thing is going to happen in sprint freestyle, just not as great of a magnitude because the rotation is going to be less. So as you can see here, the athlete rotates away from the pulling arm, and that creates a little bit more space for a little bit longer period of time, and they're able to get more out of that stroke. And of course, those extra additions are going to add up over time. So again, rotating away from the pulling arm at the last minute to get a little bit more out of each stroke. And if you watch the arm that's pulling on the other side here, right there, you can see how rotating away from the arm creates a little bit more propulsion because they get a little bit more space with each stroke. The same principles are happening backstroke, however, the timing is a little bit reversed because they're on their back. And so what happens is when the hand enters the water, the athletes are already rotated to the side. That allows the athlete to get the armpit open right away, and then they actually don't rotate until the very end of the stroke in order to keep that armpit open for as long as possible. So what I want you to think about is if this athlete had started rotating early, so they started rotating away from the stroke now, that's actually going to close their armpit because the shoulder is going to come up out of the water, and that's going to be much more difficult to create a strong pulling pattern. And so you can do that for yourself here. Get yourself in a backstroke position catch, and then rotate away from that without pulling, and you'll see that it becomes much more difficult to achieve that position. And so in this way, rotation positively impacts the pull, just like in freestyle, but the difference is the rotation happens before the stroke starts, and then it stays open until the last minute so that the pull can be achieved for as long a period of time as possible. And then at the very last minute, there's that rotation that allows for this facilitation to shift to the other side so that the same action will be performed with the other arm. So again, the rotation happens early so that the armpit can stay open. And because the athletes are on the back and the anatomy of the shoulder, that's the only way they can keep that armpit open is by getting rotated onto the side as early as possible and then staying on the side so as long as possible. So the arm is actually behind the body when pulling backstroke, and that's not a strong position to be in. So athletes need to get rotated early so that they can keep the arm down deep without having to get the arm so far behind the body. So you can see that here, the athlete gets rotated early, so you can see the huge open armpit. And again, if they had rotated up at this point, they'd lose that position. So they delay that rotation for as long as possible, keep the armpit open as long as possible, and then they shift. And so you can see on the opposite side, they rotate right away, so that allows them to get the open armpit for as long as possible, and then they pull straight back throughout that stroke. Again, the armpit gets open early because of the rotation, and then they hold that position all the way through. Watch from underneath. Again, on entry, they're rotated, and they can keep that position open, and there's very little rotation through the stroke until the very end. So if the athlete had started rotating here, it would actually close the armpit. So they delay the rotation here so that they can get in a great position and hold it. We're going to talk about how undulation positively impacts propulsion. There are two ways that undulation is beneficial to upper body propulsion. And then the first way is that by pressing the chest and keeping the hands up at the surface, you'll see how swimmers are going to be able to pull for a longer duration of time. So if they didn't press the shoulders, if they didn't press the chest, the hands and the head and everything would be level at the surface. Here, you can see how the hands and the arms are actually behind the head, so athletes are going to be able to set up the pull a little bit higher, and that's going to give them a little bit more range of motion. As they come through the pull, they started in a position where the arms are a little bit behind the body as opposed to in front of the body or level with the shoulders, and that's going to give a slightly larger amount of propulsion that they're able to create. And so the setup with the stroke right there is going to help them get a little bit more out of each stroke. You can see that more obviously here. The head is pressed, the chest is pressed, and the arms are still up at the surface. Again, a little bit more range of motion with each stroke. That's going to help get a little bit better pull with each stroke. See that here, the head and the chest is pressed, and the arms are up at the surface. It's going to allow for a little bit more range of motion, a little bit more range of motion, get a little bit better pull. So we'll see the same thing here in breaststroke. Even a slight press of the chest is going to get the head and the chest down slightly, and the arms are still going to be up at the surface, and that's going to allow for a little bit more range of motion for athletes to get a little bit more out of each pull. And every little bit starts to add up over the course of a race, because each stroke cycle they're going to move a little bit further down without sacrificing much in terms of stroke rate. So every little bit starts to add up. So the second benefit of undulation is when the head and the chest lift during the pull, it places the strongest muscles of the back, the lats, in a position to create more force. And so what you can do right now is you can just put your arms in front of you and you can round your chest and try to pull and feel the contraction. And then you can arch your chest a little bit and you'll feel how that's a little bit stronger contraction through the back. And then more importantly, when you move from a rounded position and then you arch that position, you'll really feel that the muscles shorten. And so athletes are using that motion in order to get more power and more strength through the pull. And so there's a little bit of a press and a round here, and then an arch to come out of it. You can see right at the transition, she's level, and then right as she starts to pull, she's starting to arch back out of that. And that's going to allow for a stronger position to create force from, and that's going to allow athletes to move water at a faster tempo, which is ultimately going to improve their speed. You can see that here with another athlete. There's the press and then the arch out of the pull. And that, again, is going to create a little bit more force, which adds up over time. There's another athlete. So the press gets a little bit more range of motion, and the arch out of it allows for more power and more strength. Here's another example of an athlete pressing and then arching out of it. See there, the armpits there open, and then the closing is accelerated by pulling and then arching out of that stroke. Breaststroke, you see the same thing, and then a really strong arch to create more force, more propulsion with each stroke. Same thing with a different athlete here. Really arch out to get the pull, to get more out of each stroke.